Yo, 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 it's Griever 2 in the house.
Yo, shut up. You're not a rapper.
Aww. Sup, it is Minecraft story time again here in Abydos. Today we're going to be learning a little bit about the player Charles. Hey look, the 8 diamonds is still there from last week. Now, Charles was a player that played with us on the old server, so he actually never played here in Abydos. It looks like I started this book in the 20th of December of 2020 and finished it January 27th, 2021. So grab yourself a boba tea or a raspberry lemonade, sit down as we go through the story of Charles. Now, Charles joined Alexandria in late 2015. He played only 6 weeks before he would try and start a war in Alexandria unsuccessfully. But an item he held would end up being the spark that would start a war 2 years later. This is the story of Charles. Charles joined Alexandria in a time of growth. The server was running 24/7 and it had an established community. Charles was looking for a home and Griever 2 found his post and after a short conversation invited him to Alexandria. When Charles joined, the map had just recently been expanded beyond the 1,000 border we had been confined to. However, citizens still remained at the central map for the most part. With central map being taken up, Charles had to move off of spawn map. Charles selected a chunk of land off to the west of spawn that was very close to the old downtown, which at that time was already old downtown. He was close to the Mushroom Island and began making a humble base. He would work alone for his first few weeks. The projects built at Charles's base were never really completed. However, Charles discovered that the second end portal, it was used only a few times and was the only other end portal to ever be located, and it was found by accident. Charles' base consisted of a small house and a horse stable. As Charles was a newer player, he had the help of the server and was gifted many items to help him. One of the items being an unremarkable bow obtained from the AFK fish farms. The bow was no different from any other maxed bow on the server at the time, so it didn't even get named. Charles continued to play in the West, but began focusing his play on trophies. This was the start of problems that led him to leaving. Charles enjoyed unlocking trophies, and since Alexandria was well developed by his arrival, it made getting a lot of the trophies much easier. He would begin exclusively to focus on trophies. He did most of the trophies alone with the occasional help. Once Charles had completed most of the trophies, he was left with the few trophies that required mobs. So he asked Griever 2 to enable mobs to complete some trophies. Mobs were only ran when needed for farming, and the server had to agree on it. This is still the case 6 or 7 years later. Sometimes we do run mobs for weeks on end. We've even ran mobs for 2 months straight, but most of the time it's off. Charles requested mobs at a point when the server had many players on, and it was not convenient to turn mobs on, so a player can complete a trophy requirement. It was explained to Charles that while trophies were enabled, the world was not set up as a trophy world. The completion of trophies should be done on a player's own time when they have the opportunity to get them. Griever was not prepared to enable mobs at the time, and this was not reasonable for Charles. He became angry with Griever and began to challenge him as a host. Griever did not budge, staying firm on the fact that the trophies needed to be done when mobs were put on in the evening. Charles did not accept this and rage quit the server. What could have been a small issue sadly did not end there. It escalated quickly. Charles decided he was going to message all the other players on the server telling that he was leaving and that Griever was a terrible host for restricting the mobs despite this being clear when he joined. Nobody had sympathy for him and his words fell upon deaf ears. If the story ended here, it's unlikely his story would ever be told. However, as mentioned previously, an item he held would ignite the biggest civil war the world had ever seen, ending the most prosperous age Alexandria had ever seen. But this wouldn't be for another 2 years. In the fall of 2016, a change was made to the game that was never listed on the patch notes, so it went completely unnoticed by the server. The change made it impossible to combine Infinity and Mending on the same bow, even in creative. Since this was never noticed by players, bows obtained from the fish farms were regularly destroyed as they were considered garbage. Little did players know they were discarding bows that would become one day the most coveted items on the server. However, eventually it was discovered by a player that the change had taken place. Players began to panic and checking their personal stashes, but it was too late. The bows from before the update had all been destroyed, besides ones held by players. It is estimated only 5 to 6 bows survived to 2017. One of these bows was left at the base of Charles. So when the long-term player QB had his cousin join, the bow was given as a gift to him. He was gifted a bow that would be unreplaceable and unmatched in rarity, a bow he would come to name Elbow. However, the player would only stay for a little while before leaving. He created an underwater dome, but it was never fully finished. Since he was leaving, Griever 2 had made a request to return the bow to the server with the intentions of it going to the museum. Unfortunately, the player refused to return the bow despite having no intentions of returning. This infuriated Griever, who was not accepting of the bow being lost to the world for good. He tried pleading, but the more he asked, the more the player resisted. Now I'll just kind of stop to go off into a little tangent here. I felt it was a really reasonable request. The player wasn't coming back. I said, hey, if you're not coming back on the server, is it okay if you give that bow? And he was playing with the North faction, so I said, give it to the North. You don't have to give it to me. I'm not asking for the bow. I just don't want the bow being lost off the server, because every time one of these bows leaves the server, it's, in my opinion, a tragedy. And he just felt entitled to the bow, and as far as I'm concerned, this bow is a Stradivarius. You don't own it, you just rent it for life. That's basically the way it is with these bows. So when you leave, the bow stays. But nope, he left, and with that bow. It was stated by Griever that the bow did not have to go to the museum and could be handed down to a new player. This request was also denied with no real reason for not returning the bow. This player had played such a short time his name is forgotten by most, not like it would be mentioned here anyway. Yet he felt entitled to keep this bow in his ender chest forever. With no agreement being made, the player left the server. Elbow was never recovered, and Alexandria lost a legendary artifact forever. Griever was left enraged at what happened. He had not done anything to warrant the selfish act. With the player gone and the legacy bow Elbow gone for good, Griever would turn his aggressions on QB. A war had begun. But this story is about how Charles and his bow, and that story ends here. The civil war that ended the greatest age of Alexandria is a story for another day. And I will tell that story another day, but it is a sad story because it did end the most prosperous time in Alexandria. Anyway, that is the story of Charles. I hope you liked the player bio about Charles. And in the extremely unlikely event that you're Charles watching this video, screw you, buddy.